Well, thank you, Peter. And I should say it was a great honour to get this invitation. So I have prepared a pretty comprehensive speech, but I'm conscious that you're not eating, so I hope someone gives you a bread roll. Let me begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land we are meeting on tonight, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. As I stand here tonight, I reflect that almost 40 years ago, the Business Council of Australia was formed to bring a unified voice from the business community to Bob Hawke's National Economic Summit. Hawke's vision was to modernise Australia. He knew big conversations were needed and bold decisions had to be made. He also knew that the only way to achieve lasting reform and nation-changing reform was through consensus. Back then, we had a closed, insular and outdated economy. Many of our major assets were owned by the government. It was a time of industrial turmoil, spiralling wages without productivity gains, and the beginnings of the rise of Asia. Back then, Hawke had a simple message to business: get organised, come together and speak with one voice. With the work of the late Sir R.V. Parbo and my great friend Hugh Morgan, the BCA was formed. By bringing government, business and unions together, that summit unleashed 2 decades of reform which refashioned Australia into a modern, prosperous country. Since then, we've had a doubling of income per capita, almost 30 years of uninterrupted economic growth before COVID. Now, as we prepare for Prime Minister Albanese's Jobs and Skills Summit in September, I believe it must achieve the same spirit of consensus and determination that kickstarts a fresh round of reforms to secure our economic future. We head into this summit facing some of the same issues that Hawke did: rising inflation, rising interest rates, and the need to turbocharge economic growth. There are also many new and emerging forces on the horizon: the fundamental change in geopolitics, the impact of digitisation and technology on how we live and work, the decarbonisation of our economies, and the rise of the Asian middle class. But the fundamental difference between Hawke's summit and now is that we have experienced a decade of slow wages growth. The reason people feel they can't get ahead is that their wages have not kept pace with living costs and they've fallen well below rising inflation. Now, if you think about it, it used to take about 2 years for wages to rise about $100 a fortnight. Now it takes about 7. In Hawke's time, median house prices were 3 times average wages, but these days they are almost 8. The last decade was the worst for growth in living standards since the Great Depression. As it was in Hawke's time, sustained wages growth is not going to be achieved through industrial militancy or poor employer practices, nor will it be solved by counterproductive labour shortages. It's only going to be achieved through a collaborative effort to reshape the economy into a high-wage, high-productivity one. And so, the BCA will step up, as we did almost four decades ago, and as we've been doing ever since, to work cooperatively to reimagine our future. We want all Australians to have the world's highest living standards and stable, peaceful, prosperous lives. But it's not good enough to just hope we get another 30 years of uninterrupted growth. We must strive to go far beyond that. We must be bold. We must redefine Australia to be the frontier nation, the frontier economy and the frontier society. And that is what my speech is about tonight. So what do I mean by the frontier? A frontier nation is at the cutting edge of driving the new means of wealth and value creation, new innovation and technologies, the energy transition and decarbonisation, new ways of production, new ways of meeting changing consumer demands, new industries and skills, and a respected, secure, stable middle power driving new sources of strength and respect. A frontier nation is the ticket to higher wages, higher living standards and a higher growth environment. Frontier nations are capable of constant reinvention. We are masters at this, but we need to dig deeper and do more. And this will mean strengthening our competitiveness by having the most talented people, making the most of our natural advantages, leading the development and application of world-class technologies. It means we'll be able to pay for the services our citizens need for decades to come. Frontier nations are resilient. They are independent. They are not reliant on the fortunes of others. Frontier nations do not live in fear. They are safe, secure, and they have strong partnerships with allies and they care for their neighbours. Frontier nations are those who get the first phone calls in the hours of need. Given all of this, it's clear that we can and we must be at the frontier if we want to create the next golden era of prosperity. Because where we are now, back in the pack, isn't enough to generate the incomes we need to drive better living standards for Australians. It isn't enough to generate the economic growth that will allow us to get on top of our almost $1 trillion of debt. It isn't enough to give us the resilience we need to weather and prosper in another inevitable major shock. Where we are now isn't enough to capture the value on offer and create the new forms of wealth from the huge global transformations underway. We stand at a momentous time in history. We can be bold and take risks, and we can be in control of our own destiny, or we can choose to delay, dither, and endlessly chase the idea of what might have been. And that is the task of that summit. So to reach the frontier and secure our future, I believe we need 5 big post-COVID resets. We need to reimagine and secure our economic and industrial base, have a laser-like focus on skills and capabilities of our people because they will be at the centre of reaching the frontier. Unleash the potential of our regions, strengthen our national security, and recalibrate our fiscal strategy to make sure we can pay our own way, meet community expectations, and invest in the future. First, let's look at our industrial and economic base. The global shifts to clean energy, digitisation and technology are transforming global supply chains and they are rewriting the nature of production. And this is opening up unprecedented opportunities for Australia. The frontier will be defined by clean energy and low emissions technology. With all our advantages, we can be at the cutting edge of the new mining revolution producing critical minerals, rare earths and lithium. We can power up the transition to clean energy while providing the resources the world needs to decarbonise. We can be at the front, not the back, of the new global supply chains, exporting our renewable energy and clean manufactured products. We must be bold on the technologies that we know hold the key and ensure our replacement energy system is locked in before we get rid of the existing system, because a failure of energy security is the greatest threat to transition. Success on the frontier also relies on us excelling in advanced manufacturing, using smarter, value-added, more innovative ways of making things. I see advanced manufacturing companies all over Australia being bold, creating new opportunities, but the question is how we scale up production and unleash our potential. We could be world-leading exporters in the space and defence industries. The global space industry alone is worth $370 billion a year, while defence is worth more than $600 billion each and every year. With a focused approach, we can make the electronics for missile guidance systems and high security communications, the control systems for autonomous equipment, the navigation systems for the hundreds and thousands of satellites that are going to drive pretty much everything we will do. And indeed, we can produce the smaller satellites themselves. In agriculture, we can scale up to meet the insatiable demand for our fresh quality products and produce from Asia, from the growing Asian middle class, on track to reach 3.5 billion people by the end of the decade. Last year, these exports to Asian markets were valued at around $44 billion. In services, if we accelerate our take-up of technology, we could create up to 250,000 new jobs by 2025 in areas like customer service, education, logistics, and professional services. In the new technological-driven world, the greatest rewards will go to those who can integrate systems, whether that's in defence, energy, or manufacturing. Consumers, whether they're individuals, companies, or countries, will pay for the human ingenuity that puts complex systems together. And in health, Australia could be $3.2 billion better off a year if we capture just part of the global explosion in advances in healthcare. So this is the frontier. These are the areas at the forefront of wealth and value creation. They are either with us already or they are just within our grasp. But make no mistake, not getting to the frontier leaves us back in the pack with middle-of-the-road living standards. So I want to turn to the mindsets we have to adopt if we are to reimagine our economy and reach the frontier. The first thing is thinking about what we're already really good at, our adjacencies, our advantages in areas like mining and agriculture. We must continue to play to our strengths while at the same time drive new forms of wealth creation. In new industries, we need to look at the big opportunities I've just talked about and ask ourselves, are they worth chasing? Can we play in those spaces? Can we succeed? Where can we find the biggest gains? And this will centre on our ability to scale up and in doing so, take risks. We are doing magnificent things all over the country, but without risk, there is no reward. The people, the countries, the companies who do not take risks or make bold decisions are those that stay in the middle lane. Or worse, they slide into the slow lane where they face the biggest threat of all, being overtaken by the risk takers. We are currently the 13th largest economy in the world. But over the next 3 decades, we will track to slip to the 22nd largest economy in the world. Now that is something for us all to reflect on and think about. Now let's go look at what we must be good at and where we must succeed. Now this is a very dangerous conversation because the risk is it often drifts into nationalism and poor choices. But it is one we have to have. We need to be bold, but not reckless about the areas we choose and those we don't. The best way to think about it is where there is an over-reliance on a particular supply chain or market where our fortunes can be held hostage by a few. Things that have a sovereign impact where our security is at risk because we can't do them. Foundational areas where you simply must have the capabilities in order to succeed. Let's take semiconductors as a great example. Semiconductors power everything around us, from our iPhones in our pockets to satellites in space. They are overwhelmingly made in Taiwan, South Korea, China, and the US. What could possibly go wrong? We're not going to obviously compete with Taiwan. We won't be mass producing semiconductor chips, but why can't we be at the high end of the supply chain making secure semiconductor devices? We are world leaders in quantum. We are on track to be one of the world's key producers of mRNA vaccines. We can't afford to lose these advantages. Along with AI and autonomous design, these will be the foundational capabilities of a frontier economy. We must strengthen and further develop our capabilities in these areas. And while we're great at coming up with big ideas in Australia, we must get better at commercialising and scaling them up. We don't want a repeat of the situation with solar panels, where Australia was at the forefront of that technology, but now China makes 80% of the world's solar panels and its market share is rising. Sovereign capability is about economic and national security, not protectionism. I'm not talking about picking winners, I'm talking about focus. I'm talking about moving away from grants to investment, from fragmentation to coordination, from a scattergun approach to a sharper focus on future industries and nationally significant precincts. The most dangerous mindset is to not to do anything for the fear of picking winners. That's a decision that will leave this country stranded. With all the areas that I've just outlined where we can and must succeed, we have to also be bold about the big settings. We cannot do any of these things if we are hamstrung by an uncompetitive environment. This means having a more competitive taxation system, not the lowest rates, but an internationally competitive system. Being open to foreign investment by reducing the friction in the system, but remaining unwavering in protecting our national interest. Having a planned transition to a clean energy future, not a stop-start, chaotic and expensive approach. Working with the Commonwealth and the states to remove productivity sapping and pointless state taxes like stamp duty and payroll tax, and busting the plethora of red tape that stifles our capacity to adapt and change and adds to prices and delays. We must be a country that is an investment magnet. And we are not there now. We are simply not there. The next big reset is our people. They have and always will be at the forefront of the frontier. For example, we know that we have the technology at about 50% to achieve the energy transition. The other 50% is going to come from people and their ingenuity. It's people who drive AI. It's people who drive digitisation. It's people who invent technology. So to me, it's people who are absolutely at the core of getting to the frontier. The frontier won't come to us. Our people will take us to the frontier. Let's start with migration. Migration has been the backbone of this country and the great frontier nations because skilled people bring ideas, energy, innovation, and they bring capital. They transfer that to others, helping create new jobs, new industries, and new ways of doing things. As we head into the summit, migration cannot become a battleground in this country. Instead, we have to steer a sensible course, starting with being bold enough to face into the fact that right now we do not have enough people to do the work that is needed. And there's no doubt this is holding us back from locking in the recovery, let alone getting to the frontier. Now let's look at skilling and reskilling Australians. The massive driver that will take us to the frontier is the capabilities of our people empowered by our skills and education system. And that has to start before Australians turn 5. We need to be bold about creating a system that creates multiple pathways for children to succeed. And that system can invest in young people much earlier in their lives, especially if they're disadvantaged. And that system must reinforce the fundamentals of numeracy, literacy and digital skills as early as possible. Now let me go to schools. We want to be the smartest people on the planet, but we refuse to confront the reality that our school system is not working as it should. We need to be bold enough to say, no matter how much extra we seem to spend, we are not keeping pace with international standards. On pretty much every global indicator, we are falling behind. Our schools should be beacons of excellence, where we're bold enough to try new things and admit when things aren't working. So let's not blame the teachers, let's improve the system. And let's pay teachers in line with standards and experience, encourage and incentivise them. Let's invest properly in their professional development. Let's empower principals with the autonomy to hire the people they need to drive results. And for students, let's reimagine what they leave school with, not a mark, but a foundation to lifelong learning. An academic result with a focus on literacy, numeracy and digital skills, a recognition of workability skills like teamwork and communication, and putting a value on volunteering and work. And this should form the basis of a skills passport that students can add on to in the tertiary system and they use it for the rest of their lives. Then we need to be bold enough to modernise our tertiary system, recognising that universities are not the only credible pathway, and instead have the capacity to combine credentials from university and vocational education, because that's what employers tell me they want. We need to be bold enough to break down longer degrees and certificates into shorter courses that can be stacked together. And we need to let people and their employers choose the right packages of training. But there's no point training the best people and educating the best people if you can't get the most out of the best people. So we need a fit-for-purpose, modern workplace relations system. We need to re-empower business and workers to unlock value in their workplaces and take advantage of the huge opportunities I've talked about tonight and share the benefits. This was achieved with the introduction of enterprise bargaining 30 years ago, a system that was part of the Hawke reforms. But that system is in decay. It's bogged down in red tape and technicalities. And of course, you can't get the most out of people if you're not utilising them to their full potential. If women aren't working or advancing because they can't get childcare, if families can't make the paid parental leave system work for them, or if people with disabilities can't work because they're excluded by a job description that was written 50 years ago. And for Indigenous Australians, we need to be bold and match reconciliation and recognition by lifting our ambitions from closing the gap to raising the bar and realising people's potential. For everyone to realise their full potential and for us to disrupt disadvantage, that disruption has to be about job aspiration and economic advancement. We know the frontier will be a time of constant reimagining, task change, not job destruction. With the right skills system, the right workplace relations system and a participation model that brings out the best in everyone, we can help people through the transition. And we can make sure that the new jobs are available for every single person in Australia. In the same way we need to get the best out of our people, we need to get the best out of our places, particularly regional Australia. The frontier is not defined by borders. It cannot just be the inner suburbs of Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane and Perth. Here we need to be bold, choose some places, get behind them and back them in. To tap into the new markets and make the most of our regions, we need to start by identifying the places with the greatest potential to contribute to the national economy. Then we can target them for investment, coordination and a concentrated place-based approach to turn them into major economic hubs. Let's embrace 30-year infrastructure compacts that will turbocharge these areas. It will take boldness of effort to narrow what I believe is the very serious regional divide in this country. Let's reimagine a connected nation through transport, through energy transmission and through the digital system, where we connect Australians to one another and we connect Australia to the world. Now let's go to the boldness we need in national security. A frontier society must be a secure society. Economic and social well-being are fundamental elements of our national security. Weak economies, like weak companies, are vulnerable and soft targets. We cannot afford to be timid. We are a thriving, successful country. The battle in the Ukraine has brought into sharp focus the overwhelming importance of democracies standing together to protect freedoms. We have enduring relationships with the United States, the United Kingdom and New Zealand built on our common values. And we must continue to forge ahead with alliances like AUKUS, the Quad and the Five Eyes. Together with our allies, we are stronger. But in our region, we should lead. We must be bold on our role in the Indo-Pacific. We need to be at the forefront of shaping the regional architecture and building the prosperity and resilience of our neighbours for our mutual benefit. The government's expansion of the Pacific Australia Labour Mobility Scheme is an important step. But we could be launching a major education, skills and labour market initiative in the Pacific. Half the population of the Pacific Islands is aged under 23, but less than 1/3 of school leavers secure formal employment. So why don't we encourage Australian employers to offer Pacific Islanders a variety of employment pathways, 4-year visas, full-time jobs, apprenticeships, traineeships. They could also potentially help with housing and other incentives. And then governments and employers could work together to improve their skills and employability by offering things like a skills guarantee. And this would involve Pacific Islanders undertaking short courses or micro-credentials at TAFE or with other training providers. They could apply their new skills here or return home and share what they've learned. And business has to do its part in the region by investing in the critical projects such as infrastructure and energy to build the foundation of modern, resilient economies. And I want to pay tribute to the Indo-Pacific reset being led by the Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Penny Wong. They're taking steps to foster greater trust and understanding to bring our region closer so collectively we can build on the talent and aspirations of all of our people. We also need to be bold about a broader security reset. And to do this, we need to be able to have conversations about investing in the right defence capabilities. We need to talk about short and long term here. Yes, of course we have to plan to replace our major assets like submarines and frigates. But in the meantime, we should be thinking about our short-term needs, such as missile capabilities. We need to make sure we have a workable defence policy and be bold enough to actually take some decisions as well as drive some big plans. But our unwavering priority must be always be able to defend and secure our country. So finally, I want to turn now to how a frontier nation must have resilient and strong finances so it can pay its own way and secure its future. It's time for us to have a conversation about the adequacy and efficiency of the nation's tax base, including federal and state revenue sources. This will involve some difficult questions, some tasks, and a massive conundrum. The questions are obvious. Who should do what in the federation and who should pay for what? There's no doubt our federation is littered with duplication, a lack of efficiency, and confusing systems. In respect of who pays, there are some tough conversations we must have around government services, primarily centred on eligibility, targeting and access. The tasks, which are more complex but not unachievable, are about ensuring better service delivery. We need to look at the design and ongoing funding of systems like health and aged care, the National Disability Insurance Scheme, which will continue to grow. We need to put ourselves in the shoes of the people who access them, not the people who provide them, so we can adopt simple technologies like reducing things like multiple requests for the same blood tests. We must modernise and embrace technology in these systems. We need to assist people with the digital transition instead of leaving them behind. And with the digital tools, trust them and support them, don't patronise and exclude them. Which brings me to my fiscal conundrum. I am sure as we exit the summit and head towards the budget, there will be a very big conversation about how Australia will not have enough revenue over time to pay for aged care, NDIS, health and other services. And that's a legitimate debate to have. What I'm nervous about is that we won't get that debate right. My plea on the fiscal conundrum is that we must avoid the lazy and counterproductive path of just taxing more. Instead, let's just have a conversation about making our tax system more efficient so it supports the economy to grow faster than forecast. This is the sustainable path to higher revenues to government. Punitive and incentive-sapping taxes are not the answer to any of our revenue problems. Surely, we would reap more if the system was geared towards encouraging investment and encouraging the innovation we need to drive growth. The ultimate betrayal of the social compact is to tell people you can keep spending money without growing the economy. I would love it if the company tax receipts doubled, not because we increased the tax burden, but because we decreased it. It would tell us that we are more successful as a country. We're investing more, doing more, paying people more, and yes, because we are more profitable. In conclusion, I want to call on Australians to be bold about our national character so we can reach the frontier. Reform is still possible. It's about taking a step-by-step approach. Hawke did more than unleash those seismic macroeconomic changes. He also laid the foundations for the national competition policy reforms, which benefited the economy to the tune of at least $56 billion in today's terms. In tandem with the Jobs and Skills Summit, we should be getting on with the little things because it's the accumulation of the little things that really count. Shortly, the Business Council will be putting out a report on how we can release the handbrake on economic growth with some common sense, quick microeconomic reform wins. The summit, though, is a big opportunity to reset how we work together. It's an opportunity to ask ourselves, what is the Australian way? During COVID, we saw governments, unions, businesses come together, problem solve, put a floor under the economy and a floor under our society. But I feel there is a temptation for everyone to retreat back in their corners. The summit is a chance to return to floating and testing ambitious ideas without immediately shooting them down. It's time to talk softer, listen harder and respect each other in the national discourse. It's time to stop attributing labels to people that don't make sense and shut down important conversations. Progressive isn't left-wing, conservative isn't right-wing. Frontier societies have civil conversations. We have to be bold about resetting and restating what I believe is at the centre of our national character, and that is fairness through opportunity. Australians know when something isn't fair, they can see it coming a mile off. They value fairness in a way that I think many other societies value freedom. Fairness is also a global concept. It determines how we act and how we're seen around the world. As we strive to the frontier, we have to find that sense of self-belief, which isn't arrogance or hubris, of ambition, of pride, of drive, imagination, aspiration, and a sense of giving others here and abroad a helping hand. But the greatest unfairness we could commit now is to be timid and reticent about seizing the moment. That would leave Australians stranded back in the pack with low wages and high costs. And that would be inexcusable, especially when we have such tremendous assets and advantages. But with the exception of our bedrock industries, mining and agriculture, we just can't seem to really power up and scale up a new industrial base. It's taking too long. We lack a sense of urgency. We're second-guessing ourselves while our competitor countries overtake us. The summit can be a circuit breaker, and we can use it to recommit to the boldness of action we used to have, the boldness that gets us to the frontier. The reason companies, countries and communities go to the frontier is for better lives. It's not easy. It requires courage and shared ambition. To paraphrase from Ronald Reagan's great 1986 speech about the Challenger disaster, the future is not written by the faint-hearted, it is written by the brave. The frontier is the place for pioneers, the place for risk-takers, the new explorers, people like Michelle Simmons advancing quantum technology. The frontier is not for cynics or the closed-minded. It's for the visionaries and the optimists. It's for those who are willing to be bold. The frontier is where the hopes and dreams of this generation and the ones who follow can be realised. Thank you very much.